Awesome. Okay. So a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today and bearing with us. And thanks to our panelists for joining us and taking time out of their busy days to be here. And a couple of other special thank yous. So to Gaurav, who's hosting a physically distanced viewing, and to Caremongering, who made space for the physically distant viewing, and New Vision United Church, who's hosting that group. Thank you so much. In terms of Zoom, it looks like I should have done some more prep on my end, but a couple of other things. So please just keep yourself muted. If there's any issues at all, you can email info@hamsmart.ca and we'll be monitoring that. And we'll also be monitoring the chat box. Yeah, and then we'll sort of just get rolling. So a little bit about who organized this webinar. So one of the organizers is Sarah Jama, who wasn't able to be here today. And she was in her capacity as an organizer with Caremongering Hamilton and Disability Justice Network of Ontario, which is a group that's going to say more later on, but is trying to create a world where people with disabilities are free to be. So she helped to pull everything together. And then also folks from HAMSMaRT, so Gaurav and myself and Victoria, I'm not sure if you're out there in the webinar viewing crowd. So folks from Keeping Six, which is the Hamilton Harm Reduction Action League, a community-based organization that defends the rights, dignity, and humanity of people who use drugs, and the Hamilton Social Medicine Response Team, which is an outreach service of general internal medicine and infectious disease physicians, midwives, registered nurses, family physicians, and outreach workers. I want to start with land acknowledgement, which I know one has been a new practice to reconsider in the era of digital organizing and meeting, and also can often be just sort of a tokenistic practice. But I do want to acknowledge that we are, at least the folks in HAMSMaRT and K6 and Caremongering Hamilton, are living and working and caring for each other on the territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. And this area is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Treaty. And so I think that's important to think about when we're talking about mutual aid, because the wampum belt itself depicts and represents the territory as the dish. And the dish being, or the territory being, land and resources that we all share, that we all need for life, to sustain life and sustain our communities, and that we eat from that one dish with one spoon. And I think that's really, really relevant to this practice of mutual aid that we're talking about today. And as we're talking about COVID-19 and mutual aid responses, we need to consider how colonization has led us to this moment in time and how it continues to shape the moment in time. Dine and Tasuke Pueblo artist Jade Begay reminds us how colonization and capitalism's toxic individualism has led us away from caring for the collective and towards narratives that tell us COVID-19 isn't a big deal because it is only hurting or harming elderly and chronically ill people. Mohawk policy analyst Courtney Skye points out how the colonial reserve system results in underreporting of COVID-19 cases and deaths of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, and how federal COVID-19 initiatives in Canada leave out people and businesses, for example, on reserve. So we cannot simply acknowledge the land. We need to act to dismantle colonization, return land, build relationships of mutual aid and reciprocity, and seize the opportunity that we have in the midst of this crisis to leave behind the status quo and embrace the possibility that we have for a liberated world. So to talk a little bit about what we're doing today. So we have a panel here. We have folks here from the Sex Workers Action Project, Strathcona Community Care Response, Caremongering, and then unfortunately Kyle's Place wasn't able to join us tonight, but they have sent some written words for us to share. So I'll be sharing that. And then HAMSMaRT and Keeping Six. And after folks have had a chance to speak, we'll have a question and answer period. So if you have questions for the speakers, just put them into the chat box. If you're watching on YouTube and you have a question, you can email it to info@hamsmart.ca and we'll answer questions from there as well. I already talked a bit about who the three of us are, and I talked about, man, I don't know why I made these slides. I didn't even use them. So this is the dish with one spoon, or representation of the dish with one spoon wampum belt. So what is mutual aid? I think that's a question that I've been thinking about a lot, and that people I've been able to be in conversation with have been thinking and talking about a lot. So the first person that I learned about mutual aid from is Dean Spade, who is a justice, trans and queer activist, law professor, and many, many other things, community organizer. And so my understanding of mutual aid was first shaped by learning from Dean Spade's writing and public works, as well as other people that he organizes with. And so my understanding of it is that mutual aid involves people coming together to figure out what everyone needs, and also figure out what everyone can offer, and finding ways that we can meet everyone's material needs right now, especially when the state has failed us or isn't providing what we all need. And doing that work that meets people's immediate needs while we're working to build new social relationships with each other. So by doing the work, we build these new relationships. And then we also work to change the conditions that exist that lead communities to not necessarily have what they need, or not communities not be able to self-determine. So it's both this like really practical, tangible way of lending support to each other or engaging in reciprocal relationships of support, as well as connecting it to broader political struggle. So I think with that in mind, I mean, some form of mutual aid, whether it's called that or not, has been in existence since the beginning of human evolution. But the first time that we really see this concept come up as a written concept or documented concept is, to my knowledge at least, from anarchist philosopher Peter Kropotkin. So Kropotkin argued that, in fact, rather than sort of Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest and competition, that it was cooperation that drove forward human evolution. And so I think that in addition to the crises we're seeing with COVID-19, we're also seeing this amazing and inspiring blossoming of mutual aid projects around the world and here in Hamilton. So on that note, we welcome our panelists, people who are doing mutual aid work in Hamilton. And we've asked each panelist to respond to 3 questions. So the first question is what does mutual aid mean to you? Second question, what mutual aid work has your group been engaging in? And then finally, where do you see the future of mutual aid, whether that's in your own work or in Hamilton or in broader movements? So on that note, I will hand things over to Yelena from the Sex Workers Action Project.
Thank you so much, Claire and everybody. It's really an honor to be a part of this. So to the first question, also I want to say I'm probably going to share my screen if that's at all possible as part of it.
Let's see if we can figure it out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. If it doesn't work, I can just describe it otherwise. Okay, so mutual aid for me, and also in the context of being a sex worker or being in a criminalized sort of life or atmosphere, is particularly using the current paradigms to your advantage, and also, as Claire said, seeking out each of our collective skills and sort of distributing them to where they need to go. You know, people who don't know how to mend their clothing, be connected with people who know how to sew and tailor and things like this, so on and so forth. So really it's about effective distribution of resources, not just material, but also skills, and the ability to share between communities, people who have more of one thing and people who need that thing, you know, very broad example. What was the second question?
Well, I'll just interject to say that I cannot figure out how to help you share your screen, and also to acknowledge the comment that mutual aid, Dania said, has existed in Black and Indigenous communities for centuries, and it's critical to acknowledge that. So yeah, acknowledging that while it may be talked about in the words of mutual aid or different words and different languages, that absolutely. So thanks, Dania, for acknowledging that. The second.
Yeah, mutual aid is not a white proprietary thing. It's not an intellectualism. It's about humans helping humans and making sure that people get what they need. And I really agree with that. Thank you, Dania. Oh, I just see it in the chat.
Perfect. We made you a co-host, so maybe you can share now.
Okay, let's click it. Can you see that? Okay, so, and you can still hear me? Okay, so I just want to talk about, this actually relates more to the third question, but could you just remind me of the second question, please?
Totally. So what mutual aid work has your group been engaging in?
Perfect. So SWAP Hamilton is a collective of community organizations and folks who care about sex workers' rights. And the three areas that we really focus on, our purview, if you will, is education, advocacy, and outreach. Outreach would be more of the mutual aid focused part of our harm reduction work. This includes providing harm reduction outreach packages that contain things that make it easier for sex workers to do their work, and also provides them with a sense of morale and dignity, because it includes, not just condoms and lubricant, but also things for them to feel good about themselves, cosmetics and things like this. Because one of our principles in harm reduction is that you don't want to take care of yourself if you don't want to reduce harm in your life if you don't care about yourself. So really increasing and improving that morale and reducing stigma is sort of like a constant part of our mutual aid work, because people have to care about the issue in order to really get involved in a meaningful way. Beyond that, we have been seeking grants through the city and the Hamilton Community Foundation. We have been really privileged to receive the $5,000 grant. So we've been putting that towards transportation and food cards, $50 PC grocery cards, as well as transportation vouchers from a local cab company. And we are distributing them to local shelters. We've reached out to Mary's Place, Willow's Place, Carol Ann's Place, and a couple of the hotels that have been hosting houseless folks at this time. Yeah, I think that really mutual aid has changed, and like the way that we have adapted to the COVID situation really shows that mutual aid isn't like a contemporary thing. It's not new. It's not, even exclusive to any particular group of people. And among the most marginalized, I think it's remarkable to notice that among the most marginalized groups, they tend to be more effective in deploying the way that they help each other. And yeah, so moving on to the third question, I hope that I fully answered that. I just don't want to take up too much space. But to the third question, I believe, if I'll try and rephrase it, or repeat it. What do we want to see mutual aid? How do we want to see it change in the future? Is that accurate, Claire?
Totally. What do you think the future holds, or what are you hoping for?
I'm hoping that we can have a more intersectional analysis when we're thinking about how marginalized groups of people interface with other, not just groups of people, but infrastructures, whether that be the legal system, medical system, so on and so forth. And so I have this PDF for my screen showing. This is from March 2018 from the International Committee on the Rights of Sex Workers in Europe. I believe they were the one that hosted the first World Whores Congress that created the World Whores Charter in 1980, in the 80s in Amsterdam. And you can sort of see this circle chart here: right to health, women's rights, labor rights, LGBTQ2S rights, and migrant rights. And so my hope for the future of mutual aid is for an intersectional analysis where people can really see that an injury to one is an injury to all, and that there are so many ways that we are related and alike each other, and that a lot of the times these ideas and concepts that are created, fabricated to divide us from one another, we should really be interrogating and sort of thinking about that more critically. And so, you know, particularly for sex workers' rights, people, you know, there are a broad variety of people that participate in the sale or exchange of sexual services. And this includes migrant workers. This includes Black, Indigenous, Asian, and otherwise racialized workers. This includes, you know, transgender workers. This includes people who work on the street. This includes people who are homeless and people who use drugs. And so I really want to see in the future a more intersectional analysis and a care that goes beyond just our own groups and our own individuality. I want to see more teamwork, essentially. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Yelena. Yeah, lots to think about there. And I think one thing that has been really awesome during this period has been starting to build those new relationships. Like I know this has been a period where I've started to get to know folks from DJNO and HCCI, and started to get to know yourself, and you know, being able to connect with new people and start to build those relationships. Okay, so we'll move on to our next person who's going to be speaking. And so I think next up we have Strathcona Community Care and Jenny.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Vangris, and I'm representing really a whole neighborhood of people, Strathcona neighborhood in Hamilton. I am representing and have some notes from my co-organizer and friend, Erin Stanley, who has been tirelessly involved in this work. I want to echo Yelena's thanks to Claire, the folks at DJNO, Caremongering, I mean, everybody for doing this important work in this troubled kind of moment. And want to offer some thoughts from the work that we've been doing in Strathcona. So I will sort of set the context by saying that we are a small and emergent mutual aid group that has popped up in this neighborhood directly in response to COVID-19. So I know that Yelena has been doing this work for a long time in Hamilton. And so it feels like we're the new kid on the block, just sort of popped up when COVID-19 hit, but want to share some of the lessons that we've learned in that time. So I think that, you know, Claire and Yelena and Dania, to your important acknowledgement, mutual aid has been well explored so far, so I won't add much more. I really want to highlight, and I'm here as a neighbor in Strathcona, but as a social worker by background, and I currently teach in the social work program. And so I'm really interested in the sort of broken social safety net that we have because of neoliberalism, new managerialism. And I think that for me, the thing that's so compelling about mutual aid is it's about not waiting around for that social safety net to get repaired. But to Claire's point about keeping it political, making sure that we keep applying pressure to the state to repair the real damage that's been done. I think that the thing that's been really interesting in Strathcona, and I'll talk a little bit about our project, is really breaking down the distinctions of helper and helped, and to see that all of us, no matter who we are in the world, need supports to be okay in this world, right? Like I need supports every single day in order to move through this world. And so I think that for us in Strathcona and the Mutual Aid Project, it's really been about collectively exploring the conditions in which that becomes more possible, to really see each other as folks who need and can also give support to kind of break down those barriers. And I think that one of the contributions that Erin offered as we were talking back and forth about this is one of the things that we've learned about mutual aid is that the way our society is set up, giving and receiving help is not something that we are really comfortable with in our society. It's vulnerable and it's intimate to need help, but also to offer help. And so we really need, and I think both, you know, the speakers who have spoken so far have acknowledged that this is really about relationships, right? It's really about how we relate to each other. And so our understanding of mutual aid is really forming as we do, right? As we keep moving forward on our project, I think it's coming into more clarity. In terms of what we've been doing, so we're from Strathcona neighborhood, which is on the western edge of the downtown core. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there was already some connection happening between neighbors on Facebook. We have Victoria Park really in the center of our neighborhood where lots of people congregate. And then when COVID-19 really started to impact Hamilton in mid-March, a few folks in our neighborhood sort of wondered out loud on Facebook if there was a way that we could make sure that neighbors who were unable to get to the grocery store could still access food. So we wondered that. There seemed to be a groundswell of interest, and really need to credit Erin with helping move from an idea into action. So we asked for some support on Facebook and found a bunch of volunteers. We connected and coordinated those volunteers on a WhatsApp chat, around nearly 30 volunteers from our neighborhood. We printed and distributed 2,000 flyers to every single household in the community. We developed guidelines around process, health and safety. We fundraised because while we knew that access to grocery store was an issue, we also knew that in our community food insecurity was an issue. So we raised nearly $7,000 to buy groceries for people. And we also established a small community pantry of the most highly requested items in our neighborhood. Another thing is we connected a few folks who were feeling isolated with friendly callers just to make sure that they had a bit of a lifeline out into the community if they didn't have sort of natural supports in their life. Initially, Erin did all the coordination work. So every time someone called in with a request for groceries, Erin would take the call and dispatch it out to our volunteers. And it became way too much, obviously. And so we got a hotline, thanks to one of our neighbors donated a hotline, and a group of 6 volunteers who staff that line each day of the week. We have a Facebook group where we post specific requests. So if a family, for example, needs diapers, we'll see first if anybody in the neighborhood has the particular kind of diapers. About a month ago, we started to run out of money, and it seemed like, you have to remember when we started this, I don't think anybody could have understood how long the impacts of COVID-19 would land in our communities. And so the volunteers who started, I'm not sure what they thought they were signing up for, but I don't think they thought they were signing up for a 3-month commitment to going out to the grocery store and buying groceries for their neighbors. So it seemed that the volunteer energy had started to wane a little. And so we sent out a survey to the volunteer group soliciting feedback. We'd been sort of asking for feedback along the way, but decided to make a sort of anonymous opportunity for folks to give feedback. And based on what we heard from the survey and the dwindling funds, we decided to wind down and started to put a wind down plan in place. Volunteers were still very much committed to the idea of mutual aid, but thought that this particular project was probably starting to wind down. But then a local church, Erskine, raised $700 for us and breathed new life into our project again. We checked in with the volunteer team, and in fact, they were interested in continuing. So we are winding down eventually, not as soon as we thought. And we've also, there were a couple of folks in the community who could afford groceries, but couldn't get out to the grocery store. So we've connected them with volunteer shoppers, and they're off doing their thing now. One of the things that we put in the survey was a question about whether folks were interested in continuing the conversation of mutual aid beyond kind of this moment and this project. And there is interest. And so we're going to reconvene in August for some sort of virtual gathering to discuss ways of continuing mutual aid. In the meantime, we've started a conversation on Facebook that it feels connected, but not entirely connected. Where we want to understand what community care or community safety looks like in our neighborhood in moments where the police are likely not the best to intervene. And so we have started that conversation. It is a very new conversation with a whole range of folks interested in it. We have a lot of people sharing resources on a Facebook page that's specific to Strathcona with nearly 90 members who are talking about the defund the police movement that's happening here locally, thanks to some amazing leadership in Hamilton and beyond. And we just completed a poll, and most people are actually interested in developing a community space project, something like identifying who in Strathcona does de-escalation work, so that if something happens in our neighborhood, can we rally a team fairly quickly that can go out and do that de-escalation work? Other ideas were to create a network of people who can go out and bear witness to police activity in our neighborhood. So if police do intervene, can we have a group of neighbors who are there to just sort of watch and make sure that that exchange is okay? There's also some interest in education and dialogue. So this is sort of emerging from the mutual aid stuff. It feels a little bit disconnected from our community care work, but it's all in the same neighborhood. And one of the challenges that we faced is really doing this work virtually. So what does it mean to do community organizing work when the only real way, unless you have other ideas, and I'd be so anxious to hear them, is to connect via social media. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about and worrying about. I could talk on, and I won't, because I want to give space to other folks. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jenny. That's really interesting to hear where the conversation is going, because I think, yeah, thanks to the leadership of particularly like Black young people in this city, there is a real opportunity to defund the police, and thinking of how we can support that work, and then also how we can figure out, yeah, what are those alternatives? Because I think a common criticism from people who haven't read a lot about defunding the police is like, oh, but we won't be safe, there won't be safety. And so that question of safety for who, but then also like, oh, this isn't about removing without adding, this is about like creating actually in the absence of safety and in the presence of harm, trying to move away from that system towards one with sort of true care and true safety for everyone in the community.
Doesn't
So
the HPS,
pardon?
Doesn't the HPS have like $1.4 million just chilling in the bank? Just a thought. Could we not redistribute that? Just a thought. Yeah.
It's hard to know because their budget is so obscured. On that note, I'm going to hand things over now to Mayor. So big shout out to Mayor, who stepped up to share from Caremongering the work that that you folks are doing. So, and I'm happy to share the questions again, but if you just want to talk about what you're doing and what you are thinking about these days, that's fine as well.
I've got the questions, but yeah, I'll just add in things in terms of like what mutual aid means. Like based on the conversation, like a lot of how we've come into this work is based in both disability justice and abolition. We've developed a kind of set of operating principles that we're still developing and still kind of like acting on and reworking in action and all that kind of stuff. And it is on our link tree, which is HAMSMaRT Care. And I can talk about this a little bit later, but knowing that Sins Invalid has described disability justice, which is like, you know, intersectionality, meaning, as Audre Lorde put it, like we don't live single issues lives, or you know, recognizing wholeness and like the kinds of like social relations that we're building, like knowing that it is like for the people, by the people, leadership like by those that are the most impacted. That's a lot of what informs this work, and knowing that that it is run in partnership with the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, HAMSDO, Eric's Cupboard, a base of like tons of volunteers. In terms of abolition, like the discussion on defunding the police, like the way that you create safer communities is you give people the resources that they need to survive. So yeah, if people have groceries, if people have supports, if people have resources, then you diminish this like alleged need for the police. There is no need for the police. So yeah, that's some of how this comes together in terms of like other things mutual aid means. Like it does mean also like supporting the work in the community. So it means like supporting like getting SROs out of schools. It does mean supporting getting like special constables into care at McMaster, getting, you know, action police vans out, like does mean like supporting the defunding of the police. So yeah. The other questions are kind of based in what mutual aid work we've been engaging in. So Caremongering does run like a grocery delivery service. So we send out groceries Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to people that request them through our online request form. You can also call in. People do call in when they can't make online requests because they don't have Wi-Fi or that's just like not accessible to them, and we'll do it over the phone. The questions that you sent out do say like what kind of challenges we faced, and the phone line has definitely been like one of our challenges. It's like very hard to maintain, but moving forward, that's definitely a priority of like making caremongering as accessible and functional as possible. We do have like I'm really grateful for like the base of volunteers that we have. People put in like a lot of time and like are consistently showing up to like shop for us, like shop for caremongering and shop for the people getting food and drop things off and make masks and showing up with all sorts of things. So that's awesome. Even and like tons of like behind the scenes work of like slotting deliveries and all that kind of stuff. I think in terms of like what Jenny you said on what we can be doing to like with like knowing that we're not all seeing each other in person and making use of the virtual space. I think it's an interesting conversation on like what volunteer coordination looks like online, and you know, getting people involved into these kinds of digital conversations and getting to know people through a screen, but like making time for that. That's certainly something that we're putting in the time to do. Yeah, and other than the grocery service, like there's certainly things that we want to be doing to support other work in the cities, but you know, be it things like defunding the police, be it affordable housing, and the fact that there's like tons of empty buildings that people were evicted and displaced from for the LRT that are now just like standing there while you know people don't have housing, all that kind of stuff. And so hopefully the more we have these conversations and the more this work kind of goes on, the better we can do it, because like mutual aid isn't like a service, it's a process. So, and because it's a process and it is like oriented towards like you know, changing I don't even want to say changing, like society is crumbling and has been crumbling, and that's just the conditions under which we're organizing. So what are we doing to create a strong base and network amongst ourselves to build the world that we want to see, and so forth. And the question is, where do you see the future of your work heading? I think, yeah, it's very like whatever we're doing, like want to kind of keep doing that and doing it differently or better. Yeah, would definitely love feedback and are on a continuous basis receiving feedback and thinking about it. Yeah, I feel like that's all I can really say.
One thing I was really struck by watching Caremongering organize was dealing with the conversations that came up around calling CAS and how as a group, I don't know much about your I don't know anything about your internal process, but how as a group you came together to talk about how to respond to that, and then shared your community principles and had the Facebook Live video, which was technically much better delivered than the start of this webinar, but where you had like people sharing what they were saying and then also answering questions and engaging in that conversation. And a theme that I think I also heard from other folks is that we didn't start out knowing what this was going to look like, and that some of the development of politics and of ways of articulating politics and of figuring out how to organize together, that has really, it's been sort of this learning by doing of like, we figure it out together, and it is in the process of doing the work together that we further strengthen our relationships with each other, and also our politics, our analysis, and figure out, you know, how we want to move forward. So next up, I am gonna just read some words that were shared by Kyle's Place. So I'll just bring those up. So Will, who's one of the organizers with Kyle's Place, was not able to join us this evening, but did send in some thoughts and sharing about their work. So a little bit about Kyle's Place. So Kyle's Place is a trans and non-binary prioritized space, and it's committed to fostering community, solidarity, support, advocacy, and access to resources, in particular for community members who are marginalized due to race, class, age, mental health, and abilities. Kyle's Place uses a peer/mutual aid model and values the knowledge gained from lived experience. Kyle's Place is home to Transparent Hamilton Niagara, which offers advocacy workshops and support to parents and guardians of trans and non-binary youth. The Brody Brown Name Change Fund, which assists with the financial burden of changing legal documents. The Transform Pop-Up Shop, which is a social enterprise supporting trans and non-binary folks with paid employment skills and experience. A once monthly older trans folks peer support group, a food pantry, clothing swaps, and a weekly afternoon social drop-in. Kyle's Place also offers a no-cost meeting space and a place that to host events for grassroots agencies that are committed to and work from an anti-racist and anti-oppressive perspective. So Kyle's Place, like many of us, sort of rearranged and reoriented some of the work that they were doing. So since mid-March of this year, they've been offering the following to trans and non-binary folks, as well as families with trans and non-binary youth in Hamilton and Niagara area. So they've been offering groceries and grocery gift cards, toiletries and cleaning supplies, masks, which are made and purchased from a local trans initiative, Just Breathe Beanstalk masks, intramuscular injection supplies for hormones, clippers, which are loaned out for haircuts, financial assistance for 2 to 3 months of hormones for folks without coverage, and financial assistance with legal name and gender marker changes, and then transportation and accompaniment to appointments. And then in May 2020, they were fortunate to receive some financial support from the City of Hamilton's COVID emergency funds. And so these funds are going to allow them to continue providing this kind of support for a few extra months, and as well as offer the ability to provide some honoraria to the community volunteers that have been assisting with shopping and deliveries. Yeah, so that's what Will wanted to share, but I think recognizing that it's fantastic that there's been new groups emerging, and also existing groups have worked to recognize the unique impact of COVID on groups of people that frankly are often forgotten about by the state and the state's response, and figuring out how to support people in having their needs met. I just had like a moment of terror where I was like, did I just say all of that on mute and no one told me? But I didn't. So on that note, I'm going to hand things over to Lisa, who's with K6 and HAMSMaRT, to share a bit about the work that's been happening there.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, and even though we are listed as organizers, like the people that Claire listed up front really need a big thanks. And thank you to all the panelists also who are doing and sharing their work with us. I said to Claire earlier today, it's very strange for me to organize or be part of organizing an event in which I don't feed people. So I really wish I could feed you all. I know that there is or we wish, I should say, that I know that there is some snacks happening at New Vision, so I hope that those are being enjoyed. And so I just wanted to take a bit of time maybe to start by talking about HAMSMaRT and Keeping Six and the organizations and what their respective mandates are. I actually I'm really fortunate to sit in both organizations in sort of a coordinating role. And the Hamilton Social Medicine Response Team, as Claire mentioned at the top, is an organization of healthcare workers and peer workers who try to fill or work to fill some of the gaps that exist in access to healthcare services as they stand, and also and so that involves, things like doing street outreach medicine, safer supply programs, drop-in clinics as well. We've been trying in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months to really try to work and advance this idea that healthcare, not advance, but yeah, advance, because we're building on the work of others, that healthcare workers really need to be political actors in the world, and that many of the health issues that we try to work with patients and clients around are really the result of injustice and social inequities, and that there's not really a way to treat those ailments one person at a time, because the underlying social determinants of health will always create them faster than you can undo them, even in an ideal sort of perfect healthcare system. And so that's really the mandate of HAMSMaRT. And Keeping Six is an organization that that works to defend the rights, dignity, and humanity of people who use drugs. And we are a group that is led by people who use drugs and supported by people who love and support people who use drugs. And our origins come out of a recognition that there was a great deal of work happening, really lots of places, but definitely in this city, around issues of drug use, but not a lot of input or responsiveness to people who are using drugs. So we formed that organization about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago exactly, actually, to try to advocate that people who are, and lots of people have already talked about this, people who are living it really are the experts in identifying problems, and also identifying solutions to those problems. And so those are our two groups. And we work closely together, and we share many values and principles, but there's not a 100% overlap. So I'll try to tease out when I'm talking about which organization as it relates to our experiences with mutual aid. So one of our mainstays in organizing before the pandemic hit, which seems like 8 years ago, but it's only 3 months ago, was a drop-in, and it was a tandem drop-in clinic that HAMSMaRT ran, and a drop-in for organizing and feeding, eating and discussing and art making that happened once a week. And that was really where we derived a lot of our mandate, a lot of our direction for the organization, was in bringing people together in that sort of very informal way, but also having mechanisms for discussing the work that we were seeing as an organizing committee that we thought needed to be done, and also getting direction from the ground as to what we should be doing. And when COVID hit, that the venue that we held that drop it in was needed to close its doors. And as we were getting those notices, you probably all will remember the notices after notices after notices of things that were being shut down and closed. And for many of the people that we work with, those services are really lifelines. And when they're not replaced, the consequences, as you can imagine, are quite dire. And so we decided immediately that we needed to reorganize ourselves and do some street outreach in order to first maintain that connection with folks that we really think is important in terms of understanding how and what we need to do. And second, also to provide people with, very a sort of modest amount of resources that maybe they weren't being able to access because of all these closures. So we do outreach 3 times a day. 3 times a day, feels like 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And we have really tried very, very hard in that spirit that Jenny's talking about, how people both need and receive support all the time, to include the community in our response. And like caremongering has talked about, galvanized a bunch of volunteers to do this work. We've got dozens of people who are doing outreach. Teams of 6 go out, like I said, 3 times a week, delivering bagged lunches, which are generously provided to us by the Wesley Day Center or the Wesley organization. But then we also top them up with homemade baked goods. So we have people baking like 900 baked goods a week, and also decorating the paper bags that the lunches go out in. And we've found that that's been quite meaningful to people, to have that extra love and touch go into what we're distributing. We also distribute sort of some incidental things like socks and underwear and flashlights, and we've done a tent drive because while we first and foremost think that people need access to dignified housing that suits their needs, that's not immediately available at the moment. And so we have asked people to donate tents so that people who can't stay in shelter or can't access other forms of shelter can have access to tents. And so that's sort of like in a nutshell. Oh, I also cannot forget the wonderful work that's being done by our arts coordinator. And we've added an arts component to our outreach, and also partnered with the resting and hygiene centers that are at the 3 churches in the core to have art outreach to give people an outlet, I think, to express some of their experiences of this pandemic. So and we also have some telemedicine that works with us, with the HAMSMaRT physicians doing telemedicine when we come across folks on the street who are having trouble accessing conventional health services. And so how am I doing for time? Okay, that took way longer than it should have.
You're good.
Am I great? Okay. So I think one of the things that I wanted to, in terms of thinking about mutual aid, and one of the things that Keeping Six has done over the course of its work in the last 2 years has really, as I mentioned at the top, tried to sort of work our way into these tables where decisions are being made and discussions are being had about people who use drugs. And I should clarify here too that there is quite an overlap. We did start out definitely focused on people who are using drugs based on how we formed. But as we move through the world, we really realized there was a large overlap between people who are using drugs, people who were working with Keeping Six, and people who are homeless. And so I do sort of like flip back and forth between those two experiences, recognizing that they are not one and the same. So I wanted to talk about mutual aid maybe in the context of thinking about our experiences in organizing collectively and together with volunteers and other folks like those on the panel today and other organizations in the city, and compare and contrast that a little bit with our work trying to be at these tables, these official tables where decisions are being made about the pandemic response specifically, but more broadly about the response to homelessness and drug use generally, I think. And that the work that's going on around the pandemic takes many, many forms, and not all of it we are privy to, but we have been fortunate to be invited to the table where some of the main issue raising and troubleshooting gets sorted through. And this table and its offshoots bring together many relevant city departments and agencies. And we appreciate very much being at that table where many of the discussions are about how to adjust practices during the pandemic have been taking place. And I want to begin by this part by talking about the ways in which people have talked about the successes in those circles and the collaboration that's gone on between the city and the shelter system and the healthcare sector, and how it's been very successful. And I don't want to take issue with that in any way, shape, or form. And I think there have been a lot of advances and opening up of shelter space, which has been very important, mass testing in the shelters, which has also been very important in terms of being a really key strategy for preventing the spread of COVID-19. And I also want to talk about how those successes that people are talking about haven't really been our experience. And this is going to bring us back to the idea that Claire and others and Jenny raised about the role of the state and the social safety net. And so one of the great boons that we have at doing street outreach is that we really feel like we have our finger on the pulse, and we're among many people who have their finger on the pulse of what's happening on the street. And we really use that outreach experience to bring those voices back to these tables where the decisions are being made. You know, we feel, having been at the tables, that we've made some very modest requests over the past 3 months, and it's been very difficult for us to have those requests implemented, I would say. And they seem to us to be quite simple things like increasing access to bathrooms, income compensation for folks who had been asked to isolate either for positive diagnosis of corona or because they were awaiting testing results. I want to acknowledge that wasn't our idea, but we really got behind it once it was put into the fore. Reduce barriers to distributing naloxone. So it's been very difficult for people to access naloxone, which is the antidote to opiate overdose in this time of COVID, and also a temporary moratorium on moving encampments. And we really feel that we've run into a lot of walls with those very, very simple requests in the context of a lot of movement happening. And to the extent that we have been able to move any of those needles, we really feel, and I don't have proof of this, so but that it's been our activism in the community and not the sort of reasoned, measured conversations that we've had in presenting the issues. And so, you know, that dichotomy of what we experience in terms of, you know, trying to work with the people who actually have the resources and have the ability to mobilize them, as compared to the people who don't have the resources and as much ability to mobilize them on that mass scale, is something that's really been notable to us throughout. And I just, you know, I just want to like quickly just diverge to a quick anecdote, but I've been reading a book about race in Cuba by an author called Esteban Morales Dominguez. And I'm not really far into it and I don't really want to talk about it, but one of the lines in the book that he says that I just can't sort of get out of my head is he talks about the ways in which, you know, the revolution and the sort of dissipation of capitalism didn't dissipate racism, and that the Cuban people and the Cuban government really had to work hard and continue to work hard to deal with the issues of racism. And then he talks about the idea that, but the one difference was that Black and Mestizo folks had the government as their ally. And I just read that sentence over and over and over again and thought what that would be like, you know, thinking about all levels of government and how we as marginalized people or people working with marginalized people relate to levels of government and our frustration at not feeling as though they are our allies. And to me, that idea of mutual aid is really about, people have talked about it already, building those relationships of genuine allyship, building those relationships of mutual support, and you know, coming together and working in a way that doesn't feel like people that you're at the table with are working against you. And so I want to talk about that, you know, mutual aid comes out of, as we've already acknowledged, like centuries and centuries, little centuries of organizing and working and caring, people caring for each other under very difficult and oppressive circumstances. And that it's a response to that repression that this, you know, that this sort of takes form. And also that a recognition that the state is not our ally, that we are our own allies. And so when I was coming up as an organizer, my mentors and leaders would always tell me, you know, like no one is going to do it for you. And I think you know, you have to do the work yourself. You have to be the people who create the change. You have to be the ones who are, you know, again, creating the change. And so I think that to me is what this mutual aid, it really is. And the difference that you feel when you're working in a context of mutual aid versus non-allyship is just so remarkable. And it's not to say there aren't difficulties or disagreements in organizing. We all come to things, you know, with different political orientations, and none of us are ready-made to bring about the change that we want to see in the world. but there's a sincerity and a willingness to figure it out that I think is really important, an important component of mutual aid. And as opposed to, you know, and it's work that when you come together, even though it's really hard work and you're dealing with very difficult things on a daily basis, that it's generative and it's imaginative and it inspires you instead of demoralizing you. And I think that that's the future. And I think it's like the mutual aid is the future that we need to build. And I find it really, you know, I try really hard to remember that the people who are vested with those resources and the power, they're actually not the future. Is it, you know, the people in City Hall who can't or won't get white supremacists off their forecart are not the future. And the Premier who slashes basic income and cuts social service rates are not the future. And the Trudeau who buys a pipeline and jails Indigenous people is not the future. The future, as we've talked about already, are the youth from DJNO who live stream the release of their organizing principles, which were just so clearly, I mean, again, as Claire said, we don't know the background, but they're so clearly grounded in your own experiences and collectively working out how to respond to the challenges and successes that you faced. And it's the bravery and the ingenuity. The future is that bravery and ingenuity of the Black Lives Matter activists who live tweeted a series of demands from multiple significant sites in the city and have pushed a conversation and a movement to new levels, and things that were unimaginable just weeks and months ago are now mainstream. And the future and mutual aid is like the religious groups that responded to the call to open their doors to give people a space first to warm up and now to cool off and to rest, to use the bathroom and to clean up. And, you know, mutual aid is the land defenders who are connecting the issues of exploitation with issues of environment, with issues of caring for one another. And so I think the future really is, you know, the principles of mutual aid writ large, and for justice and equity and harmony seeking people everywhere. You know, that spirit is really alluring and infectious, and it's affirming, and you know, it's hard work, and it has a long history that precedes us, and it will have a long history after us. But you know, it's inspiring work, and I think I'm really honored to be here today and talking to people about it and hearing about other people's experiences of you know, coming together to build this world that we want. And as Jenny said, you know, not waiting for it. Thank you. I think that was more than my 12 minutes. I'm sorry.
Thanks. That was really beautiful. And that's the excitement and hope that I'm feeling too. Not that it's easy and not that we know all the answers and we're going to mess it up and we're going to figure out how to move through it, but that there is that joy and that potential. On that note, those are our speakers. So we have a few minutes for questions and answers. So we have a couple that have come in by email that I'll share. And then I've also asked people on there's about 40 people watching on the YouTube live stream. So at least that worked out. And so, yeah, so we'll share some questions. So the first set of questions is from an undergraduate student at McMaster, and has some questions around mutual aid and student life. So the first question is, how can students, high school, post-secondary, or otherwise, engage in mutual aid in their academic context? Yeah, so I'll just leave it there. What are your thoughts on students, either that you are working with now or the role of students in mutual aid work? And I'll open that up to whoever wants to jump in.
Personally, I'm part of a student organization, even though I dropped out, but HAMSMaRT started as a student organizing kind of circle. And knowing that campus politics can be very useless, and that mutual aid and like actually leaving campus and engaging with your community on a meaningful level is way more worthwhile. I think that's really what I can say, in that like mutual aid is, and like really building ties with your community, it is a lot harder of a process, but a lot more rewarding, and like exemplifies the reality that this is work that we should all be doing in our daily lives. You know, if you're a student, like, you know, talk to your peers about like what kind of support each other needs, and like what you guys want to be doing to reaching out to other community spaces. You know, the space also runs out of New Vision, and that's like an awesome youth center. You've got high school students leading walkouts, high school students like participating in things like H3 USB Kids Need Help, and calling for like SROs to be kicked out of high schools, things like that. You know, so that's my recommendation, is that you talk to each other, and you get out with each other.
Awesome. So plugging into the work that's already happening and identifying the issues that are where you are and working on them. And also it sounds like for you at least, like getting connected to community, not just staying in that campus bubble that can happen sometimes. Feel free to correct me if I paraphrased incorrectly. Anyone else want to weigh in on sort of the role of students in mutual aid, or ways for students to get involved?
If I could, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think that having done community organizing in my past and this work that I'm doing with Strathcona right now, the thing that I acknowledge is such a valuable resource is time and energy. And I feel like students certainly have energy. In some moments, they have more time than in other moments, for sure. And so I agree with Mayor, getting in touch with kind of existing community groups and finding out how you can lend your time and energy is so hugely important. I'll also say, because I teach undergraduate students in the social work program, I think that there are ways that the university could do better to meaningfully engage in conversations about mutual aid and allow students to engage in that work in a way that benefits them in the classroom, because there's so much learning that happens in community and in doing this work. I won't say more than reading textbooks, but like in a different way. And so I would encourage instructors to think about, are there ways we can value that learning in the community and kind of recognize it in the colonial institutional space that we occupy.
Anyone else want to jump in before I move on to the next question?
I want to say something about cheating, but I don't feel like that's good.
It's a life skill.
Mutual aid. You got the answer. I don't.
So the next question is, this person, thank you for your questions. You sent in 5, so I'm gonna pick just a couple of them. How can we continue to introduce the idea of mutual aid into our personal circles and communities, especially those communities that are more individualistic? For example, are there any small day-to-day conversations we can spark with our loved ones to encourage mutual aid?
Why is the video on me? Okay, yes. So to mutual aid, you need, just so everybody can laugh and like, okay. I would say it's pretty simple. It's not like this like weird concept. It's literally just like, what do people need? What do people in your community need? What do you need? What do you have? What can you do? What can you offer? And really, it's just starting with really like base considerations of like, what do we have and how can we collaborate? And I think that starting conversations with like loved ones or your peers is as simple as asking what they need and what they are doing today. And if they give you a superficial answer, maybe delving a bit deeper and trying to have a more inquisitive conversation about what they're really needing, not just, you know, to have a sense of normalcy outside of this COVID pandemic, or like truly what can we do inside of this crisis, inside of this pandemic, and what can we do to meet people's material needs. That's what I would say.
Another, thanks, Yelena. I think that's it. Like it is, in some ways, it's like a fancy name for a thing that just is intuitive in caring for people in community and caring for ourselves as well. So another question was, are there any resources that people would recommend to sort of start learning about or learning more about mutual aid? So if you have any suggestions for like readings, videos, that kind of thing.
Personally, I would say that a lot of really idea generative and work has come from disabled communities, and so looking into Sins Invalid is maybe like something, if you haven't already done it, that might be a great way to go. If you're reading about abolition for the first time, the writings of like George Jackson and Angela Davis, and obviously the Enough is Enough report from Minneapolis are great ways to be doing this. And this is all concurrent to mutual aid because, again, like it all kind of happens side by side. Like, yeah.
I'd look at Maggie's and look at like pretty much every sex worker collective that exists, because when Backpage happened, like we closed ranks, but when this happened, I mean, with this happening, COVID, we are dying and starving, and sex workers just, mobilized with their very limited capacity and resources to, we basically took the funds we did have. We had $2,000 that were donated by by Hamilton's previous sex work organization, Big Susie's, and we basically like liquidated that and gave it away in $100 installments because that's all we could do, because grocery cards and transportation cards are great, but people still need to pay rent and pay for their medication, so Maggie's has raised over $100,000 to give to as individual stipends to sex workers, and so of them, many other local sex work organizations. So, yeah.
And I think that's when we hear that the state doesn't have resources to support what people need to live, and then we understand the size of police and military budgets and resource extractive budgets. And we also understand that people who do not, have the resources of the state or the resources of capitalism still finding ways to share what we have with each other in order for us all to survive. It really puts into, for me at least, it puts into relief that that there is another world that's possible, and there is another way of organizing our resources that's possible, and that this scarcity, many thinkers have talked and activists have talked about how scarcity is used as a tool in capitalism to try and convince us that we couldn't all have what we needed to live, and that actually we can. A couple of resources are in the chat box. So Jenny's posted, I'm not sure if it's a video or a link, and then I posted something from the Sins Invalid blog that Mayor was referencing, and I'll put it in the YouTube chat box as well. So more than a few people have asked about how to get plugged into each of the different groups that have spoken today. So if maybe people want to talk about how to connect with the work that you're doing, and then I can also get contact information if people are comfortable sharing it from the different groups and email it out to attendees afterwards. But maybe I'll just open it up for people to talk about ways to get plugged into the work that you're involved in.
I forgot to mention my resource, so I'm just going to jump in. I just put a link in the group, and it's in the YouTube. I would say the best way to keep up to date with what we're doing is our Facebook page. Our Swap Hamilton Facebook page is just facebook.com/SWAP Hamilton. The same handles, SWAP Hamilton, can be used to find us on Twitter or on Instagram. and our website is www.swaphamilton.com. Our email is swaphamilton@gmail.com. And I'm trying to think if I'm missing something. Oh, the most recent resources that we would love. Sorry, now my ADHD brain. We just uploaded our Google Drives of sex work zines, over 150 ebooks, and over 50 sex work zines from around the world that I've personally been able to archive and put together and put together. So that's on our website. There's you probably find it easier on our Twitter. Check it out there. Try not to take up too much space. The Amnesty link that I have posted, I would just like to encourage, if people really would like to help, from their own small way, if you're involved in any organization, please try and contact Jackie Hansen from Amnesty International or Amnesty Canada. You can contact her at jhansen@amnesty.ca. That's HANSEN. Amnesty Canada is doing a campaign writing letters to federal ministers asking for them to include sex workers in the federal relief, because sex workers are often not included in the CERB relief, or it's a catch-22 of de facto criminalization. And that's too big to get into right now to explain fully, but please, if you are part of an organization and you would like to endorse the letter from Amnesty Canada and the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform's letter to the Minister of Women and Gender Equity, Marian Monsef, among other federal and provincial ministers, please contact Jackie Hansen. Check out that link, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Yelena, and thanks for giving us that really tangible action that we can take. Who wants to go next? Jenny, it's all you.
As we said, our Strathcona Community Care response is in some ways winding down. We're going to try to figure out what that means. Our kind of foray into what neighborhood community safety, or a neighborhood that is not reliant on police to be safe, is a very new conversation. Strathcona, we think that I think that borders are kind of not real. So if you're outside of Strathcona but want to engage in what kind of neighborhood, community safety looks like, you can feel free to get in touch with me, because I'm not like Yelena, I can't figure out what all of our handles are and stuff like that, but just shoot me an email, and I actually really want to chat with people about how this stuff lands in our neighborhoods and in our backyards. So I'm up for that conversation.
And we can think about, this was, tonight was much more of a one-way flow of information, but we can think about how to organize in ways where it's more of a conversation and less of a like a panel style discussion in the future around some of these conversations as well. Mayor or Lisa, does one of you want to go?
Just quickly, you can always access our link tree. I'm not sure if Claire, you'd mind posting that for ease of access, but we have you can basically sign up to volunteer. I think moving forward, we're going to prioritize a lot more like plugging new people in and doing volunteer trainings and all that kind of stuff. So that's one way. And we also have an active Facebook group, and you're more than welcome to continue posting your own programming or resources or anything of the sorts in that Facebook group.
So I just wanted to say one little quick thing that I missed in my remarks, which is I did want to acknowledge and thank the agencies in the city that have reached out to us and supported us in the form of material or monetary supports, and that's been really important to our work. To get in touch with us, I think keeping6.org is the best way to do that. So if you go to our website, there's a banner at the top that says COVID information. And if you click on it, then it will sort of walk you through volunteering. There's a panel on the side that says volunteer, and we just ask that people register their interest in volunteering, and then we can then we will reach out to you when there's opportunities to volunteer. And also you can reach us through our website, keeping6.org too, if you have specific questions or specific contributions or things that you'd like to participate in.
Awesome. I just want to check in with Gaurav and the folks at New Vision. Were there any questions from there specifically?
Yeah, I don't think that we have any questions here right now. Thank you very much, though, for checking in.
Thanks, Gaurav. So one of the last questions, and I'm mindful of time, we're going to wrap up. So we'll actually make this the last question. So how do we ensure folks without internet access are able to be a part of conversations and get aid? So we'll finish on that question, knowing that we're not going to fully answer it. It'll just sort of be a starting point. So any final thoughts from folks on how in this era of COVID and physical distancing, do we make sure that people who aren't a part of these digital spaces are either brought into them, or we're going to where people are and we're not leaving people behind by doing everything online? Lisa, go for it.
Oh, there's a motorcycle outside. So I think this is one area where we've really had to work hard since our inception, and that people don't, a lot of people that we're working together with don't actually readily have access to internet, but that was definitely amped up with the closure of public spaces in terms of people's ability to access free Wi-Fi. And I think one of the things that the COVID response really didn't take those kinds of things into consideration, right? The ways in which people would be differentially impacted by closures of services and closures of public spaces and closures of, public infrastructure. And so I think that's an ongoing discussion for us, definitely. And for us, we've just had to say, well, we're going to keep going out into the community. I mean, we just had to do it. And we're going to go out and we're going to put it as much as, do as much as we can around infection control. And we're going to offer people as much as we can in terms of hand washing and physical distancing, and doing that education piece around physical distancing. But sometimes there is no substitute, and you just have to be out there despite the recommendations. I think that's something that we really railed and struggled with at the beginning of this, was how to do that, and that that the management of one public health crisis can't precipitate 7 others. That's just not the solution. That's not really an answer, though, is it? I mean, if there's no internet, there's no internet. You have to be physically in front of each other.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that we're doing street outreach 3 times a week, and not everything can be online, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Anyone else want to jump in on that question of how do we make sure, or how do we mitigate folks getting left behind who aren't part of digital, like having internet access or in these digital spaces?
I have no real solutions. And this is a worry that I have about kind of ongoing community dialogues. I will say that I mentioned that we flyered all 2,000 households. We went into every apartment building. And most of our calls have been from flyers as opposed to online. So that did work, but that is like a one-time communication. So for a future panel, I'd be really interested in having a conversation about how you organize in the time of COVID that's not fully reliant on the internet to do so.
Could I add one more thing?
Do it.
Yeah, so I just think that as things start to open up, there's going to be a continued role for this kind of advocacy, because I think things are going to open up very differently. And well, I don't think that that's what people are saying, that things are going to open up very differently, that, there's not going to be a ready access to public washrooms, that there's going to be limits in terms of who can go into what public spaces, that the days of sort of lingering in the library or the TIMS to access the Wi-Fi to cool off, those kinds of things. It's going to be hard for those types of activities to resume. And so to just say that there's going to be a need for that, for continued work on that front, even as things open up. And for some people, it feels like a more of a return to normal. For other people, it's not going to feel like that, and it's not going to be like that. And just, you know, we got to keep our eyes on the prize in terms of that one too.
I don't know too much about this, but I just saw today as well that Acorn is doing some organizing in Hamilton around internet access, acknowledging that it is, you know, it's a necessity and needs to be treated like that for so many things, including organizing, but for lots of other reasons as well. Well, on that note, so we had, I think at our max, we had about 30 people on here, but we had over 40 people watching the live stream on YouTube. So really awesome to have 70 people, mostly from Hamilton, joining this conversation. And a huge thank you to Gaurav for hosting the physically distanced viewing at New Vision, and Ian and the New Vision Rest and Hygiene crew and caremongering crew over there. And a huge thank you to all of our panelists. It's so weird to host a panel and not have people like clap for the amazing words that you shared. So I will clap. Thank you for sharing everything that you did today and taking the time out of your day to be here. And yeah, and we'll think about sort of what's next and how to do this better, both from a perspective of what we're talking about and who is here and in the conversation, and from a perspective of like the technical aspects of things as well. So on that note, hooray for mutual aid in Hamilton, and thanks for being here, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Delivering a report on the equity action plan, and their plan is